The ceiling shook. Dust fell onto the transmission papers like gray snow. Colonel Heinrich Brandt did not look up. He had stopped flinching at explosions 3 weeks ago, when the Soviet artillery first reached the outskirts of Berlin. Now the rumble of collapsing buildings was just background noise, like rain against a window. He focused on the intercepted message in front of him, a British naval transmission his team had captured by accident while scanning for American frequencies. The message was routine, a logistics report about convoy movements. But one line made his hands go cold. The British officer who wrote it had referenced German submarine positions from February 1942. Specific positions. Grid coordinates that matched Kriegsmarine operational orders from that month, orders that had been transmitted exclusively through Enigma. Brandt read the line again. Then again. His throat tightened. He was 52 years old. He had spent 23 years in signals intelligence, the last 15 devoted to the Enigma machine. He knew its rotors, its plugboard settings, its daily key changes. He knew the mathematics behind it, 158 quintillion possible combinations for each message. The British would need thousands of years to break it by brute force. Every German officer believed this. Every textbook said so. The Enigma was unbreakable, but this message suggested otherwise. The British had known exactly where those submarines were. Not approximately. Exactly. And the only way they could have known was if they had read the Enigma signals themselves. Lieutenant Eva Schreiber entered the bunker carrying a stack of decoded Wehrmacht messages. She was 24, sharp-eyed, one of the few female officers in Signals Command. She had been assigned to Brandt's unit after her previous posting in France was overrun. She noticed his expression immediately. "Colonel. What is it?" Brandt folded the message and slipped it into his jacket. "Nothing. Atmospheric interference. The transmission was corrupted." She did not believe him. He could see it in her eyes. But she was smart enough not to press. Outside, another explosion shook the walls. Closer this time. The lights flickered. Brandt stood. "I need air. Continue processing the backlog." He walked through the bunker corridors, past exhausted radio operators and broken equipment. The facility had been a signals intelligence hub for the Eastern Front, but now it was just a tomb waiting to be sealed. Half the staff had already fled west, hoping to surrender to the Americans instead of the Soviets. The rest stayed because they had nowhere else to go. He climbed the stairs to the surface. Berlin was burning. The sky glowed orange, and the smell of smoke and cordite filled his lungs. Soviet Katyusha rockets screamed overhead, their distinctive wailing sound earning them the nickname, Stalin's organs. Somewhere to the east, T-34 tanks were grinding through the rubble. The Reich had days left, perhaps hours, but Brandt was not thinking about the battle. He was thinking about the Atlantic. About the U-boat war that Germany had lost. About the convoys that always seemed to escape, the submarines that were always found. For years, Admiral Donitz had blamed bad luck, Allied radar improvements, aerial patrols. But what if it was none of those things? What if the Allies had simply read every transmission, known every patrol route, anticipated every attack? He thought about the numbers. Over 30,000 U-boat crewmen had died in the Atlantic campaign. 700 submarines lost. Germany had built the largest submarine fleet in history, and the Allies had destroyed it with impossible precision. Brandt had always accepted the official explanations. Now he wondered if he had been a fool. He returned to the bunker. Schreiber was waiting for him, concern on her face. "Colonel, an SS Sturmbannführer is here. He wants a status report on communications security." Brandt felt ice in his stomach. The SS had been executing defeatists and traitors throughout Berlin. Anyone who questioned the war effort, anyone who suggested Germany might lose, they disappeared. If Brandt voiced his suspicions about Enigma, he would be dead within the hour. He straightened his uniform. "Tell him everything is functioning normally. Our encryption remains uncompromised." Schreiber hesitated. Is that true? He looked at her for a long moment. She had lost her brother on a U-boat 2 years ago. U-224, sunk in the Bay of Biscay with all hands. If Enigma had been broken, then the British had known exactly where that submarine was. They had sent aircraft to that precise location. They had killed her brother with perfect foreknowledge. For now, Brandt said quietly, it is the only truth that will keep us alive. He walked toward the SS officer, his face a mask of confidence. But inside, a terrible question was forming. A question he would need to answer before the Reich collapsed entirely. If Enigma was broken, who else knew? And why had no one stopped the killing? The farmhouse stood alone at the edge of a burned wheat field, its walls pockmarked with bullet holes from fighting that had passed through days earlier. Brandt and Schreiber approached on foot, having abandoned their vehicle when the fuel ran out near Hamburg. They had traveled for 3 days through a Germany that no longer existed, roads clogged with refugees, bridges destroyed, entire cities reduced to smoking craters. The Wehrmacht was dissolving. Soldiers threw away their uniforms and walked home in civilian clothes. The war was over, even if the surrender had not yet been signed. Admiral Karl Weidmann answered the door with a pistol in his hand. He was 61, gaunt, his naval uniform hanging loose on a frame that had once been powerful. He recognized Brandt's signals intelligence insignia and lowered the weapon. I wondered when someone would come, he said. Though I expected the British, not one of our own. They sat in his kitchen, drinking ersatz coffee made from roasted acorns. Weidmann had been dismissed from naval intelligence in late 1942 after submitting a classified report questioning Enigma security. He had noticed patterns in Allied behavior, convoys that changed course hours after U-boat positions were transmitted, aircraft that appeared over submarines with suspicious accuracy. He had recommended an immediate review of encryption procedures. His superiors had called him a defeatist and forced him into early retirement. They did not want to hear it, Weidmann said, his voice bitter. Enigma was perfect. Enigma was German engineering. To question it was to question the Reich itself. Brandt showed him the intercepted British message. Weidmann read it twice, then laughed, a harsh, broken sound. So now you believe me. 3 years too late. 100,000 men too late. Schreiber leaned forward. Admiral, I need to know about you, 224. My brother was the radio operator. The boat was sunk in March 1943 in the Bay of Biscay. Was its position compromised? Weidmann looked at her with something like pity. Every position was compromised, child. Every signal we sent, they read. The British had a facility, I never learned where, filled with mathematicians and machines. They called their intelligence Ultra. I only heard the name once, from a source in Switzerland who was later found dead in his hotel room. He rose and retrieved a leather satchel from beneath a floorboard. Inside were handwritten notes, mathematical calculations, patrol charts marked with red ink. I kept records. Dates when our submarines were sunk. Times when their positions were transmitted via Enigma. In 73% of cases, the Allied response came within 12 hours of our transmission. That is not coincidence. That is not radar. That is reading our mail. Brandt studied the documents. The evidence was damning. But something else troubled him. Admiral, you mentioned Lorenz before we entered. The teleprinter cipher used by High Command. Surely that was secure. Weidmann shook his head. I have no proof. But if they broke Enigma, why would they stop there? Lorenz carried Hitler's personal orders. Strategic plans for the entire war. If the British could read those messages. He trailed off, the implication too vast to complete. Schreiber stood suddenly, her face pale. Through the window, she had spotted movement, gray uniforms emerging from the tree line. SS troops, at least a dozen, spreading out to surround the farmhouse. They followed us, she said. Brandt grabbed Weidmann's satchel. Is there another way out? The root cellar. It connects to an irrigation ditch that leads to the river. They moved quickly, but Weidman was slow, his legs weakened by age and months of poor nutrition. The first bullets shattered the kitchen window as they reached the cellar stairs. Brandt pushed Schreiber down first, then turned to help the admiral. The shot took Weidman in the chest. He stumbled forward into Brandt's arms, blood soaking through his uniform. His eyes were already dimming. "Find out what they knew," he whispered. "Find out how many died because we were too proud to question our own machines." He pressed something into Brandt's hand, a small brass key, and then went still. Brandt descended into the darkness, Schreiber pulling him forward. Behind them, boots thundered on the farmhouse floor. But the SS would find only a dead admiral and empty rooms. The truth was escaping through the mud and the cold water, carried by two people who now understood exactly what it had cost. The key opened a safe deposit box in a Hamburg bank that no longer had walls. Brandt and Schreiber found it in the rubble, the vault exposed to the sky like an open wound. Inside the box was a single name and location: General Friedrich Meyer, Bunker Sigrid, 20 kilometers south of Flensburg. Weidman had left them a trail to follow. Even in death, they reached the bunker on the 4th of May, 1945. Hitler had been dead for 4 days. The Reich was hours from total collapse. British forces controlled the roads, but in the chaos of surrender, 2 German officers traveling on foot attracted little attention. Everyone was fleeing somewhere. No one cared about destinations anymore. Bunker Sigrid had been a signals command post for the Northern Front. Now it served as a gathering point for officers negotiating surrender terms with the Allies. General Meyer was among them, a tall, silver-haired man in his 60s who had commanded Wehrmacht communications since 1941. He was the highest-ranking signals officer still alive. Brandt found him alone in a concrete room, burning documents in a steel barrel. The general did not seem surprised to see visitors. "Colonel Brandt. I remember you from the 1938 encryption conference in Vienna. You gave a paper on rotor synchronization. Quite brilliant. General, I need to know about Enigma. About Ultra. About what High Command knew and when they knew it." Meyer stopped feeding papers into the flames. His face, lit by the flickering fire, showed exhaustion beyond physical tiredness, a weariness of the soul. "You have discovered the truth, then. I wondered if anyone would, before the end." He sat down heavily on a wooden crate. Outside, they could hear vehicles moving, British voices calling orders in English. The surrender was being formalized. The war was ending not with a battle, but with paperwork. "We suspected by late 1942, Meyer said quietly. Certain admirals, certain generals. The patterns were too consistent. Convoys escaping at the last moment. Air raids arriving precisely when our defenses were weakest. Someone in the Abwehr compiled a report suggesting the British had broken our communications. The report reached Göring, who dismissed it as defeatist propaganda. It reached Himmler, who ordered the author shot." Schreiber stepped forward, her voice trembling with controlled fury. "You knew. You knew they were reading our signals, and you kept sending men to die." Meyer could not meet her eyes. "What would you have had us do? Tell the Führer that his unbreakable machine was broken? Tell him that every order he gave was being read by Churchill within hours? We would have been executed for treason. And nothing would have changed. Hitler would never have believed it. He would have blamed saboteurs, traitors, Jews, anyone but the machine." Brandt felt a cold rage building in his chest. "So you chose your lives over theirs? Over the U-boat crews? Over the soldiers who walked into ambushes because the enemy knew they were coming?" "We chose to survive," Meyer said. "Perhaps that was cowardice. Perhaps it was wisdom. In a madhouse, the sane man learns to stay silent." He reached into his pocket and produced a small glass capsule, cyanide, the suicide pill that senior officers carried for emergencies. He held it up to the light. "I am not going to face a tribunal. I am not going to answer questions from British intelligence officers who already know everything I could tell them. They broke Lorenz too, you know. The Geheimschreiber. Hitler's personal cipher. They called it Tunny. Every strategic order for the last 2 years of the war, they read it all. Normandy, the Ardennes, everything. We never had a chance. Schreiber grabbed his wrist. You owe us more than this. You owe us names. Records. Proof. Meyer smiled sadly. The proof is burning in that barrel. The names are dead or fleeing to Argentina. And the Allies will never reveal what they knew. They will keep ultra secret for decades, because they want to use our machines against the Soviets. The same encryption that killed your brother will help them win the next war. He pulled his hand free gently. I am sorry, Lieutenant. I am sorry for all of it. But sorry changes nothing. He placed the capsule between his teeth. Brandt lunged forward, but he was too slow. The crunch of glass. The smell of almonds. Meyer slumped sideways, his eyes still open, staring at the burning documents that held the last secrets of the Reich. Brandt stood in the silence, Schreiber beside him. Outside, the war was ending. But the questions they carried would have no answers. The dead could not speak, and the living had chosen not to. The bells rang across Germany on the 8th of May, 1945. Church bells, village bells, bells that had survived the bombing and the fires. They rang for peace, for the end of 6 years of slaughter, for the silence of guns that had killed 50 million people. In the streets of Flensburg, British soldiers handed out chocolate to German children who had never tasted it. Somewhere, someone was playing an accordion. The war was over. Brandt walked through the crowds alone. Schreiber had left that morning, heading south to find whatever remained of her family in Bavaria. Their farewell had been brief. She had taken Weidmann's notes, not as evidence, but as a memorial. Something to remember her brother by, even if the truth was uglier than any lie. She will never speak of it, Brandt thought. And neither will I. An American officer approached him near the harbor. Young, confident, wearing the insignia of military intelligence. He spoke German with a Midwestern accent. Colonel Heinrich Brandt. Signals Intelligence, Eastern Front Communications. Brandt stopped walking. Who is asking? Captain James Morrison, U.S. Army G2. We've been looking for you. He smiled pleasantly, as if they were meeting at a cocktail party. You have expertise we could use. The Soviets are our allies today, but tomorrow is a different story. We need people who understand German encryption. People who can help us build something better. Brandt studied the American's face. He saw no malice there, only pragmatism. The war against fascism was ending. The war against communism was beginning. And men like Brandt were valuable commodities in the New World Order. You know about Enigma, Brandt said. It was not a question. Morrison's smile did not waver. We know everything about Enigma. We've known since 1943. The British shared their intelligence with us after we entered the war. Every message your Navy sent, every order from the Wehrmacht, we read them within hours. Sometimes within minutes. He said it casually, as if discussing the weather. Brandt felt something collapse inside him. Not surprise, he had known the truth for days now. But hearing it confirmed, spoken aloud by an enemy officer with a chocolate bar in his pocket, made it suddenly and terribly real. How many of my countrymen died because of Ultra? Morrison shrugged. Impossible to calculate. The intelligence shortened the war by at least 2 years. Maybe more. Saved millions of Allied lives. As for German lives. He paused, choosing his words carefully. War is mathematics, Colonel. We did the calculations. The numbers favored us. Brandt thought of Weidmann, bleeding out in a farmhouse. Of Meyer, biting down on cyanide rather than face judgment. Of Schreiber's brother, entombed in a steel coffin at the bottom of the Bay of Biscay. All of them, numbers in someone else's equation. What do you want from me? Come work for us. Help us build the next generation of encryption. The Soviets have their own mathematicians, their own machines. We need to stay ahead. You could be part of something important. Brandt reached into his jacket and withdrew the documents he had been carrying since Hamburg. Weidmann's calculations. Meyer's partial records. The evidence of German blindness and Allied brilliance. That he looked at the papers for a long moment. Then he walked to the edge of the harbor and threw them into the water. Morrison watched without expression. That was unnecessary. We already have copies of everything that matters. Then you do not need me. He turned and walked away. Morrison called after him, but Brandt did not look back. The American would find other Germans willing to trade their expertise for safety. The world was full of men who could calculate without conscience. Brandt found an empty church near the edge of town. Half the roof was missing, and pigeons nested in the rafters. He sat in a pew that had survived the bombing, looking up at a stained glass window that had not. The war was over. Germany was defeated. And the secret of Ultra would remain buried for decades, known only to intelligence officers and mathematicians who understood that some truths were too dangerous to share. The families of the dead would never know. The histories would speak of radar and luck and Allied courage. Enigma would remain, in public memory, the unbreakable machine. A boy entered the church, thin and hungry, searching for food or shelter. He saw Brandt and hesitated. Are you a soldier? Brandt considered the question. He had worn a uniform for 25 years. He had believed in codes and ciphers and the certainty of mathematics. Now he believed in nothing except the weight of the dead. I was a believer, he said finally. In something that was never real. The boy did not understand. Brandt gave him the last of his rations and watched him disappear into the ruined streets. Then he sat alone in the silence, listening to the bells that rang for peace, wondering if peace was possible for men who had learned too late that their faith had been a weapon used against them. Outside, the world was beginning again. Inside, Brandt remained with the ghosts. He would carry them for the rest of his life, the 30,000 submariners, the countless soldiers, the brother of a woman he would never see again. They had died believing in a machine. And the machine had betrayed them all.